going to be a breakdown video of a press briefing between the FBI Director Robert Mueller and U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft. So,
the investigation into Tuesday's attack is still moving vigorously. I want to express my appreciation to the thousands of agents and support staff of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are literally working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, following leads in the investigation. Their work has been excellent. I join the American people in thanking them for their dedication to the country. The number of tips and potential leads coming into the FBI has been very substantial. We've received helpful leads from both the 1-800 number and the website, and are grateful for the American people and their participation in this investigation. To date, the hotline has received more than 7,700 phone calls. The website, 47,000 potential leads. Let me repeat, those two resources are important for us and for the public. Any member of the public that has information that may be helpful to the investigation, please call 1-866-483-5137. The toll-free calling number is 1-866-483-5137. Or you can reach us at the internet at www.ifbccfbi.gov.
in the early weeks preceding the attacks of September 11th, there were tens of thousands of calls that came in. And according to the New York Post, I believe at the time, or the New York Daily News, it was one of those. And it was a headline, I remember, that there was, Americans were coming together to fight against terrorism, and it was prevalent. Meanwhile, later on, there was a report during that headline. I think it was like somewhere, it was after the invasion of Iraq. I can't give you a month, or it was the year 2003. As I remember, it was after Iraq. It came out that a lot of those, it was like 88%, 85% of those calls were made due to religious and racial segregation. And people said, I'm living next door to a Muslim family, and we think that they're anti-American. There was so many of these, false calls. And this is the reason why the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York City, they got a lot of money of overtime regarding this. And a lot of these people were detained. And you can only imagine how many people, not even Muslims, but sheiks, Indians, anybody that was brown, basically. I always hear this transparent declaration of, America came together. Well, fuck no, they didn't. And then afterwards, after the attacks, we wanted our, pound of flesh. We would have went to war with freaking Guam at one point. Madagascar or something, like out of a risk game. And, we went to war with Iraq, and we killed approximately 1.5 million people on the basis of a lie from a man the CIA helped to torture in Egypt, who gave a false information. Imagine that. We went to war on this. Information wasn't even vetted. That's what happened. The video will pause a little bit.
In an effort to assist the FBI with manpower, I have directed the U.S. Marshals Service to assign more than 300 deputy marshals to provide needed assistance to FBI field offices. These deputy marshals will be assigned to the various locations across the country to augment and enhance the ongoing investigation and the responsibilities we have. While the FBI has always had a law enforcement presence in the air, the Department of Transportation has decided to expand our country's law enforcement capacities in that respect. Each day as flights increase, we will be adding additional enforcement officials from the Department of Justice as air marshals on planes, in addition to the already heightened security on the ground in airports. These additional law enforcement officials from various federal agencies are being assigned to the FAA to ensure aircraft passenger safety. Yesterday, I met with several members of the House and Senate leadership, including the leadership of the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees. FBI Director Mueller and I discussed with them the current threat assessment, including our belief that associates of the hijackers that have ties to terrorist organizations may be a continuing presence in the United States.
That continued to be true. In fact, the 9/11 Commission even interviewed members of the New York field office, as well as the headquarters in Washington, about is Al-Qaeda cells active today, and they were. Actually, they were active all the way until about maybe 2006. And, this isn't surprising. Why does terrorism exist in the first place? You think these people just woke up and became members of Al-Qaeda for no reason? You think somebody just wakes up to become a terrorist for no reason? They're a byproduct of an action. I'm not saying it's the United States' fault. These people, they create the vacuum. And when your foreign policy is dictated on imperialism, and the affected minority are going to be the subsection of a religion called Islam, you're going to get people to basically turn to the very people who are fighting against you. That's the terrorist organizations, groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, As-Sahab, Boko Haram, Jaish-e-Islam, Jamaat Islamiyah, Abu Sayyaf, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, right? These groups exist for a reason. They prey on the vulnerable, those who are affected directly from Western imperialism. They'll go to first, but they go to poverty areas where they're illiterates because these people aren't religious. They take advantage of poor people, desperate people. It's like, look what's happening now, right? Look at what the West and Israel are doing to the Gazans, right? And not even just Gaza, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria. You think this is not going to create a vacuum of where terrorists are going to basically attack the United States? It's a foregone conclusion. It's not a matter of when. It's going to be not a matter of why. It's a matter of when, right? Soon, or even a year from now. But it will happen, and we will see a reinvigoration of terrorist activity. Look at Al-Qaeda right now. They're bigger than ever before under bin Laden in Afghanistan, under the Taliban, because the Taliban allowed Al-Qaeda to exist in silence, where bin Laden was very outwardly to the media. This is a more dangerous Al-Qaeda under Hamza bin Laden, and Saif al-Adil. They didn't even name an e-meter because they didn't want to bring the attention. So we're really going to pay the price for this. And when I say us, I'm talking about civilians. And, Al-Qaeda, certainly does exist now more than ever, bigger than before. But even when Ashcroft was making this statement, they were inside the country.
This threat assessment has helped us to identify several areas where we should strengthen our laws to increase the ability of the Department of Justice and its component agencies to identify, prevent, and punish terrorism.
Yeah, you know what I did? The Department of Justice, along with the New York City Police Department and the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York City, basically, and INS, basically were subjugating Muslims. And a lot, the FBI were terrible in the years after 9/11 because a lot of these Muslims were basically demonized and even set up for terrorist activity that they had no affiliation with any groups. And they took advantage, a lot of these people, and this is when the internet started getting popular around 2006, 5, 6, 7, right around that period. We had a lot of stings by the FBI here in New York, especially here. And what they did was they became invasive. So now we need to hear what they have to say. We need to see what they have to do. And so in order to do this, we have to have intrusive policies, and none more so intrusive than the Obama administration, which came later, where he allowed for Verizon and AT&T to basically, their executives to basically work with the NSA and hand over, with no warrant whatsoever, list of customers. And it was in the millions. And there's a famous story about room 601A, where a AT&T technician, Mark Klein, saw a room that he was not familiar with and he had no key to. And it was basically a room with, I think, there was certain phone drives or I forgot the name of it was like a drive or something where phone lines are basically hooked up to. And the NSA had built this room to use these lines to listen to the phone calls of everyday Americans. And soon in the future, Klein reported this, and this was a big issue, and that the Obama administration worked with the NSA and its director, Alexander, I think it was Derek Alexander or something, and basically worked with cell phone companies to collect data. That means your emails, your phone calls, your text messages, all stored in a warehouse in Pine Bluff, Utah, called the Data Utah Center, the Utah Data Center. And when they first opened up, they used so much electricity it shut down half of the state of Utah's electricity out. That's how much fucking electricity they were using. How much data they collected. The invasive policies of the American government really they're still existing today. Not, they're much more quieter now. But back then we had, Electric Intifada, The Intercept reporting on this. Chris Hedges, and basically brought attention to this. And I think it was Hedges who brought up a suit against Obama.
The meetings we
I don't know if it was for the NSA, though. It was for something.
had were very productive, and I'm optimistic that we will be able to act quickly to provide law enforcement with the additional tools that are necessary to fight terrorism. I was encouraged by the members' support and their pledge to work as members of the Congress with the Department of Justice to move this agenda of anti-terrorism legislation forward. In the next few days, we intend to finalize a package of legislative measures that will be comprehensive. Areas covered include criminal justice, immigration, intelligence gathering, and financial infrastructure. And while the final details are still being discussed, I can highlight a few of the items that we will address in the proposal. Under intelligence gathering, we want to provide additional tools to collect intelligence on terrorists, including expanded electronic surveillance, search authority, and the ability to identify, seize, and forfeit terrorist assets. Two specific changes we have proposed include: first, Current law requires us to obtain a wiretap for a phone number. It does not allow us to obtain a wiretap authority for an individual. Well, with the advances in technology, we need to make sure that our laws are also advancing.
Probably was not aware of this, but already at this time, Bush was meeting with Director Hayden, Michael Hayden, who was the director of the NSA, about how we can get ahead on the terrorists. Because, how did we miss these signs? How did we miss the intelligence that was coming in regarding Bin Laden's threat to airline security? Well, none of this would have happened had the NSA, had the CIA shared intelligence with the FBI, the State Department. And, that's not me saying, it's, the whistleblowers that came out and said this, and basically could have prevented the 9/11 attacks from even happening. And this is without, Saudi and Israeli intelligence who were monitoring these hijackers in the country between the years 2000 and 2001. It's not a, fringe conspiracy. It's actually a fact, right? The only thing that we don't know is what information had they had any regarding the hijackers inside the country. I happen to think that they had a lot, and that they, if shared, could have prevented 9/11. But I'm speculating here, but not anymore with the Saudis. At least now with the Saudis, we have confirmation. First, people that looked at classified information that showed through the Canistro document that yes, indeed, Saudi Arabia intelligence was working with CIA inside the country. Now, Israeli intelligence, I happen to have a theory that they were running their own operation and following, members of the hijacking team of the 9/11 attacks, and that they were working on their own because they were already here, and they were, monitoring Hamas and Hezbollah. And, how did they get this information? I still don't know. But we do know is that they were acting as art students and working with moving companies, very small ones, in moving around from, state to state and looking at, they were spying on the FBI, the DEA, the Secret Service, and living next door to most, if not all, of the 19 hijackers living in close proximity. So I'm sure they had some intelligence whatsoever, what they had. But, Ashcroft, I happen to think that he had no idea that the Bush State Department was already working with the NSA, because Ashcroft was not around when they were, when the White House legal counsel, like, Alberto Gonzales and John Yoo, were basically circumventing the Geneva Conventions for foreign enemy combatants. Ashcroft and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, this is Bush's high-end, government. They weren't involved with the neocons because they were not neoconservative. And that's why, these people basically were against the very idea of the intelligence services abusing the free civil liberties and privacy rights of everyday Americans so that they could protect us. In other words, we got to take away your rights to protect the rights that you have left. Well, Al Qaeda didn't take away my rights, you did.
We're proposing that we provide wiretaps so that you can assign the wiretap to the individual, so that we can gain intelligence from individuals who use multiple telephones and changing cellular phones that move around with individuals. You understand that assigning the authority only to the hardware means that when a person changes hardware, we lose our capacity to surveil. And given the nature and availability of literally disposable telephones in modern society, we need to be able to have the court authority to monitor not the phone, but the telephone communications of a person, and to have that authority stay with the person. Second, current law requires that we obtain a separate wiretap in each jurisdiction of the country where an investigation is being pursued. We would like to change the law so that one wiretap approval can be obtained for all jurisdictions working on an investigation, particularly given the mobility of individuals and the capacity of individuals who are mobile to communicate. This is a reasonable upgrade in our opportunity to help us curtail and combat the threat. I want to assure you that in our effort to make sure that law enforcement can gain the intelligence that it needs in order to protect America, we are also mindful of our responsibility to protect the rights and privacy of Americans. Within the area of criminal justice, we want to make sure that our laws convey the seriousness of the crime of terrorism. First, we want to eliminate the statute of limitations for prosecution of terrorism crimes. Second, we feel it is imperative to make sure that terrorism is made the same kind of priority, that we would be able to fight with the same kind of integrity and equally strong tools that other crimes are subjected to. For example, we are identifying instances where the law currently makes it easier to prosecute drug trafficking and organized crime or espionage than it is to prosecute terrorism.
You wouldn't have had this problem had the Clinton administration, which basically, had a good team regarding understanding the nature of terrorism or Arab fundamentalism. And that was basically because they had an excellent office in New York City led by John O'Neill. You had Richard Clark, the national coordinator of counterterrorism. You had a very brief National Security Council, a very brief president's principals meetings. And, the threat terror matrix, number one and number two of almost every month was the threat of bin Laden. Now, when Bush came in, he basically saw the threat, which was a Cold War threat. And basically, that's China, North Korea, right? And all of a sudden, the only layover from the Clinton administration was Richard Clark, but he was like begging, to get any type of briefing with the president about Al Qaeda, and they wouldn't let him. And so these, it's almost like, how could they not see the problem? But basically, it's true that most times it's malfeasance. It's just that, we're led by a nation of idiots. And as of right now, you cannot say that we're not led by a nation of idiots with the last two presidents that we had in Biden and Trump, right? No, one's an old imbecile mummy, the other one's just an absolute illiterate, right? What's next, right? I don't know what's next, to tell you the truth.
If terrorism has not had a priority in the criminal justice system previously, it's time for us to understand that it needs to be a priority in the criminal justice system now. Let me give you two examples. We have,
it reminds me of like, you ever live in a town where there was like near accidents or an accident here and there, and you're going to say these, the town residents say, if they don't put a light there, someone's going to die. And then, one day you have that car accident and two people die, and, town's in uproar, they have a meeting, and all of a sudden the light's put up there, but it's fucking too late. Two people are dead. The warning signs were already there. In the year 2000, 2001. You got the threat to the airline industry going back as far back as 1995 with the Pachinko plot. It wasn't like, you couldn't have spent a couple of $1 million on, safety borders or cockpit doors. You could have done that, but they didn't.
Increasing the penalties and elevating our capacity to deal with terrorism. A person who harbors a person involved in espionage is subject to stiffer penalties than a person who harbors an individual involved in terrorism. We think this reflects an inadequate response to the kind of threat that terrorism poses to our culture.
Terrorism could
Within
be
financial infrastructure, it is important to have an understanding in our laws of the result of offering financial support to a terrorist. Understanding will not only give us the ability to adequately punish those who assist terrorists, but also move toward dismantling the infrastructure of terrorist organizations. We are proposing making, providing material support or resources to a terrorist organization, an offense that would enable us to prosecute someone under the money laundering statutes. Now, we will be working diligently over the next day or maybe two to finalize this comprehensive proposal. And we will call upon the Congress of the United States to enact these important anti-terrorism measures this week. We need these tools to fight the terrorism threat which exists in the United States, and we must meet that growing threat. Now I call upon Director Mueller for remarks.
Good afternoon. Before I spend a moment discussing the current investigation, I want to talk briefly about another area of the FBI's responsibilities, and that relates to civil rights. Since the horrific attacks on September 11th, dozens of retaliatory hate crimes have been directed at members of the Arab American community, including assaults, arsons, threatening communications, and two possibly, and I say possibly, ethnically motivated murders.
Right, but let me tell you something. You know, you were involved in a number of investigations that turned out to be false themselves. And not only that, need we talk about the Boston bombers, the Smarter bombers, right? The brothers. You had your eye on them for a long time. Why didn't you stop them from, committing those acts where I don't know how many people were killed, but it was a couple of dozen or something like that. I'm not sure. I forgot about how many people were killed in that attack. But again, missed opportunities, right? And it just so happens that the opportunities that the FBI had basically not missed were the opportunities to set up people who had no affiliation with terror or were just, understanding, the basis of these groups like Al Qaeda and Islamic State. And then these people aren't the brightest of bulbs. Some of them were illiterates, and some of them are just mentally handicapped. And you ended up arresting them and making them, full blast to say, we got a terrorist.
Many of these criminal
It's embarrassing.
acts have been directed at Muslim houses of worship and at Muslim community centers.
He's right about that.
I'll make it very clear. Vigilante attacks and threats against Arab Americans will not be tolerated. Though we are all saddened by the recent acts of terrorism against our nation, such acts of retaliation violate federal law and more particularly run counter to the very principles of equality and freedom upon which our nation is founded. The FBI and the Department of Justice are committed to aggressively investigating and prosecuting violations of the federal hate crime laws. We to date have initiated 40 hate crime investigations involving reported attacks on Arab American citizens and institutions. And we are working with the Department of Justice to review other incidents to see if federal violations have taken place.
They have.
I might also add that the FBI is reaching out to leaders of the Arab American community in each of our 56 field offices across the country. One other note before we discuss briefly this investigation. I want to announce that the FBI is again calling upon the support and assistance of the American people. We are actively seeking and recruiting English-speaking individuals with professional level proficiency in Arabic and Farsi. Those who would wish to...
This was a problem with the FBI, right? Ali Soufan from the New York field office was the only Arabic speaker in the counterterrorism unit, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. Why didn't the FBI? They had this, like, we're talking about the fucking early 90s, okay? This is after the World Trade Center bombing. you had 8 years before 9/11 to start hiring Arab linguists at the FBI. Why didn't they do that? The CIA did, but the FBI did not. It just mind-boggling to think that the New York field office is the best in the country regarding counterterrorism, Arab fundamentalism, because of the World Trade Center attacks in '93, the Khobar Towers bombing, the bombing of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and then the Millennium Plot, and then 9/11, right? And then the USS Cole bombing, and then 9/11. And all this is considered the front center agency unit. They even had a unit called the Bin Laden Unit. Only one Arabic speaker. And look, this is after 9/11. They're still begging for Arabic speakers.
Join this program must
Mm.
be American citizens who have been permanent residents in the United States for at least 3 of the last 5 years. Each of these individuals who would seek to be employed by the FBI will be evaluated based on experience and education and must pass a thorough background investigation and a language proficiency examination. We ask that anyone who is interested in this and has the proficiency to call 1-866-483-5137, and let me repeat that, 1-866-483-5137. Call that number or check the FBI website at www.fbi.gov. Now, turning to the ongoing investigation, I will say that we now have 500 personnel here in FBI headquarters, representative of 32 agencies, federal, state, and local, working 24 hours a day, coordinating the investigation across the country. And I should say also internationally, because we have more than 30 FBI legat offices across the world involved in the investigation. The AG, Attorney General, already mentioned that we've had 47,000 internet tips. Our hotline has produced 7,800 tips. In addition to that, we've had in excess of 26,000 leads generated through the various field offices. I might finish up by saying
how many of those were actually legitimate. And like I said, after the Iraq, this is days after the Iraq War, weeks later, there was that report regarding most of them were false.
That we have, in the course of questioning a number of individuals throughout the country, we have 49 individuals who are currently being detained by the Immigration Service because of some concerns about the status of those individuals in the country.
You got to remember, too, in the days after the 9/11 attacks, the Bush administration, I'm talking about the highest levels, right? The president and, Richard Clark and the director of the CIA were pushing Bush to basically get the Bin Laden family out of the country because they're going to be persecuted. Well, they had a large entourage, and on September 13th or 14th, they were flown out of the country. This is when the rest of America couldn't fly on a plane yet because they were not open just yet. I think it was September 12th. I'm sorry, September 12th, September 13th, because they opened up the 13th. It was right before they opened up, and days also afterwards. Days later, they were flying more out of the country, out of Kentucky and Oklahoma, and the FBI never got to interview these people. And Bin Laden and family had people, he had family that were going to the University of Massachusetts. The 3 states that were prominent were Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Boston. A lot of these, princes, Saudi princes, were into horse racing. That's where they were in Kentucky. A lot of these princes, and a lot of these people didn't get interviewed. None of them did. Why not? I always said, those who probably were affiliated with 9/11 attacks, those who had intimate information, I'm talking about real sensitive intelligence, were either out of the country or dead, right? Now, most of these people worked in the intelligence field or were with the Saudi government or with the Israeli government. Everybody got deported. You know, there was over 200 people that were involved in that foreign intelligence ring involving Israel. Over 200. Most of them, if not all, were deported because they had overstayed their visas. That's the first crime they committed. Because before we even interviewed any of them, we didn't, charge them with a crime. It's really smart when you think about it. It's really a great idea. You have foreign intelligence says, you know what, let's bring in these operators, have them overstay their visas or violate their standing. And the first thing that they're going to be doing is basically being sent out of the country, handed over to INS, and then shipped off back to Israel, Saudi Arabia. Well, those who assisted with Khalid Abdul Wahab out west, they all flew back to Saudi Arabia. Fahad al-Tamari, Omar al-Bayoumi, right? And God knows how many Saudi operatives that were deported out of the country.
And with that, I think the Attorney General and I would be happy to answer questions.
The questions were basically just, repetitive at this point. So I'll spare you the trivialities of it. But as you can see now, with these John Ashcroft, Robert Mueller press briefings, is that now we're going to get into basically the intelligence fold about, the compromise of American civil liberties and the reaction of terrorism from the public, and also what is the government's reaction to terrorism of the attacks of September 11, 2001. And I have a bunch of these press briefings that we're going to be doing in the future regarding this, because you have to hear from the horse's mouth. You get the truth or some close form of the truth always on the day of the event itself by the media, or in the days following this, the immediate days following it. You just have to watch for yourself, because not everybody's on the script. Okay. They're led by their editors, by their executive directors that basically want to put out a message. And they don't do any reporting anymore. It's unfortunate, right? But at least we did have some reporting on this. But it came in the early precepts of the attacks. That's why I do these videos. All right. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Have a great weekend. See you next video.